Welcome. We have a very good discussion today with a very interesting guest, Geoff Young, who ran for office as a Democrat, actually. Geoff Young, he just ran for Kentucky's sixth congressional district. He actually won the primary for the Democratic Party, and why this is significant, and why, the question is, if you're not familiar with Geoff, you may have seen him. He was interviewed by Jimmy Dore. Um, why would I be interviewing someone who ran for office as a Democrat? Well, Geoff is not your standard Democrat. He's an anti-war, anti-interventionist, anti-imperialist, leftist. And even though he won the Democratic primary, they did not support him because he's so anti-war and progressive and anti-establishment. So yeah, please explain why this isn't the first time you've ran, and you've run with other parties in the past. Why did you run? Why did you run as a Democrat, and what did you hope to achieve?
Okay, well, I've lived in Kentucky, in Lexington, which is in the 6th District, in the bluegrass part of the state, for 40 years. I moved here in 1982 from Massachusetts, where I grew up. And I wasn't interested in running for any office until 2012. I had been here 30 years at that point. Worked for 15 years at the Kentucky Energy Office in Frankfort, the capital. The mission of that very small office was to promote energy efficiency and renewable energy technologies in all sectors of Kentucky's economy. So working there, I learned quite a bit about the way state government works. Anyway, I started running for office in 2012. Started out as a Green. It's a very tiny Green party in Kentucky. And, I helped organize it a little bit and helped get Jill Stein onto the ballot. I guess that was 2012 probably. In 2012, I first ran for something, which was the Kentucky State House. I ran as a Green, as an entrenched Republican. No way I was going to win. Democrats didn't even run anyone. So there was an independent, a Green, and the incumbent. And I learned some about how the process works, how you run for office, what you have to do. And in 2014, I went back to my lifelong party, Democratic Party, and ran for the U.S. House of Representatives in the 6th Congressional District. That is kind of evenly mixed purple, Democrats, Republicans, and some independents. And I ran in the Democratic primary. I had one opponent, equally unknown as I was, and they rigged it. The Kentucky Democratic Party is totally corrupt. They rigged it in her favor. There's a law in Kentucky that makes that illegal. Neither party is allowed to favor or tip the scales toward their favorite candidate in a primary election. But they do it all the time if it's an important election to them, and if there's somebody that they don't like. The reason they didn't like me is they knew already in 2012 that they couldn't control me. They couldn't tell me what to do. They couldn't, if I were to get into a legislature, they wouldn't be able to tell me how to vote. And they knew that they could control my opponent in 2014. So they rigged it. And in 2015, I ran for governor. That we have odd year elections for governor in Kentucky, and I had one entrenched. Well, he was the Attorney General of Kentucky, Jack Conway, 2015. He wanted to be governor. So I was his only opponent in the primary, and they rigged it big time. He had millions of dollars. I had about, very little, almost nothing. And he refused to debate me. And but they rigged it, and I sued them. Started suing them in 2015 for election fraud. There's this law that says any party that has a primary is not allowed to tilt it toward their favorite one. So it's gone on and on like that. In 2020, I even tried running in the Republican primary against Andy Barr, the incumbent. And they rigged it too in exactly the same way. So in 2022, I went back to the Democrats and actually won the primary for the first time against one newcomer, very young, basically didn't know anything about foreign affairs. And I'm an expert in that. But yeah, so I won that primary and then went on to the general election last November.
Yeah, and with that background, becomes pretty obvious why the Democratic Party establishment would not want to support you. You're definitely an independent, and that's very smart what you did actually, and to go with whichever way you could to try and get in. In this case, you ran as a Democrat. In the past, you ran as a Republican. You ran as a Green before, and it's not because you're a Democrat. It's not because you're a Republican. It's because if there's an opening to try and get in and put forward progressive, populist, leftist, anti-imperialist politics, that's a smart way of doing it. So that's very, very smart. And so also your policies, you've been very much attacked by the Democratic Party establishment because you have some pretty strong policies. You were interviewed by Jimmy Dore. You went over some of that stuff. One of the things that they really want to attack you for, the establishment, is you want to end the military aid to Ukraine, the Kiev regime. Is that correct?
Yeah, I can tell you a story about primary election night in May of 2022. We were watching the returns at a bar in downtown Lexington. And, both my Democratic opponent and I were there with, some friends and a bunch of other people. And my race was quite close all the way till 11 p.m. We got there around 6 and we're watching these returns and kept getting closer. It started off ahead. So around, a little before 11, two young Democrats asked me, can we talk with you outside? So I went outside, talked with them. Still hadn't been called either way. And one of them was from Young Democrats, in Kentucky, Fayette County. The other one was from DSA. And they said, well, we could really help you a lot. We've got all these members and we can organize them, and have them go door to door, knocking on doors for you and really help you win the general election. But you can't say that Russia is liberating the Ukrainian people.
Yeah.
You can't say that. We won't support you at all if you say that, if you keep saying it. I said, well, you're making a demand. I didn't even know the outcome. They might have known that I had won the primary, but I didn't. Uh, and say, well, I'm not going to tell you today that I'm going to stop saying that Russia is liberating Ukrainian people. I said, well, how about tomorrow? Let's wait a few
Persistent.
months and see what happens there. And no, I never changed my position. I've always known from reading alternative media sources that the United States has been the main aggressor in Ukraine since 2014, when we had a coup and overthrew their kind of neutral, moderate president and installed a basically Nazi-dominated regime there, and tried to make them a very powerful member of NATO by shipping in weapons and training them and all that. So Russia was nervous about its own national security, being attacked from Ukraine right on its border, and they were forced in February of 2022 to send in their forces to try to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. I knew about all that, and apparently these young Democrats didn't know it or didn't want to admit it, and they're telling me I have to stop. I have to change my whole position on foreign policy. Never did it. I never got any of their support, but I got 35% of the vote in November, and the normal average Democrat gets 40% against this incumbent. So I only did 5% worse than establishment normal Democrats who have tons of money, $1 or $2 million. They only did 5% better than I did.
Yeah, so that's one of the most controversial issues right now, actually, especially within anti-imperialist circles and the left. The situation with Russia and Ukraine, and you see a lot of people who used to be pretty anti-war and left, now all of a sudden supporting the military-industrial complex. It's not even the thing that they don't get is it's not even a question of supporting Putin or not supporting him, whether you like him or not. What it's really about is opposing our government's military industrial complex, which we've seen has destroyed so many countries throughout the world. What do you think of what's going on with the left right now on this issue?
Well, I think that the power of the mainstream media corporations is almost unimaginable. They ever since February 2022, the Russians have been winning the war in Ukraine on the ground, in reality. But the American and British media have been winning the propaganda war. Let's see, so that's 10 months now.
Yeah.
They simply have a different reality, and they portray it every night to millions of people and every day in the newspapers. And it's the worst propaganda I've ever seen in my life. It was pretty bad around 9/11 and the year or two after that, when the United States was moving troops into the Middle East, Afghanistan. That was bad, but from February until now, which is December 20th, we're taping this. The propaganda is the worst I've ever seen in my life. I get information from the web, and I seek out reliable sources, people who don't make stuff up, who base their conclusions on um, information of what's actually going on. They get information from the Russian side, the Ukrainian side, the American, British, and there. I can tell you some names of people I watch. There's the Saker, Vineyard of the Saker. There's Andrei Martinyov. There's Larry. Sorry, I forgot his last name, but there are these analysts. Douglas McGregor, who often appears on Fox News, a retired U.S. colonel. He just tells it like it is. And he's been saying for 10 months that Ukraine has been losing. There's no way they can win. Anyway, I get my information from other sources. And the Democrats, unfortunately, both parties, especially the Democrats right now in Congress, seem to get their information only from Western mainstream media, establishment media. And the result is they have no idea what's actually going on. They're completely propagandized, completely duped, and they have no clue. Same for the president. He has no clue what's going on, what the actual impacts are on the Ukrainian people. They're horrific. And now, with all these sanctions that have been backfiring, Western Europe is suffering tremendously from lack of energy. They're starting to freeze this winter. So we just don't know, Washington is in its own little bubble. They have no idea what's happening. And all they think about is how is it going to affect the next election, in 2024? How is it going to affect us politically? But the two parties are united. They're all in favor of sending weapons to Ukraine. It ends up on the black market, very corrupt. The weapons don't get to the front line, a lot of them. And then when they do get there, the Ukrainian government and military now is dominated by Nazis. There are a lot of non-Nazi Ukrainian troops, but anyway, it's a black hole.
Yeah,
You can't win, and so eventually Washington is going to have to admit that the entire project was a complete disaster. It has failed, and Russia has won. Within a few months, they're going to have to face that fact. I don't know what will happen in a few months. I mean, I'll be able to say, I've been telling you this for a year. But,
yeah,
the power of the media is extreme. Most of my friends, think I'm, a tool, a puppet of Putin.
it was the same thing. It was the same thing with Syria and all the other cases. Anyone who told the truth at the time was demonized as whatever term they wanted to use, and then
puppet.
yeah, and then when the damage was done and some information came out some years later, it's like, oh, that person was actually proven correct when the damage is already done.
Yeah, well, the information has been coming out in real time as it happens. I knew that the situation, the supposed massacre in Bucha, was perpetrated by the Ukrainians and by Nazi militias, and not by Russian troops. I knew it, like 2 days after it happened. That's how good these left-wing media sources are. Alternative media, they're really accurate, and they're quite fast. You know, they won't report something the minute it happens, but they'll look into it, and a day or two later, they'll tell you what really happened.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard to even count like how many things they've lied about already since this conflict in Ukraine and Donbass. And
Hmm.
yeah, that's like you were saying, the propaganda around this, it is even worse than what we saw with the previous wars over the years. And I think that has to do with the level of technology, social media, all of this stuff, because it's massive, massive. We're being inundated with this stuff constantly. And I remember especially when it was earlier in the year when the Russian forces entered into Ukraine in February and in March and earlier towards the beginning of it. It was extreme, like on social media. Like you didn't even have to like any of these pages, but all of a sudden you'd be seeing all these ads spreading propaganda in favor of Ukraine. And I didn't like any of these pages. I didn't follow all these pages, but suddenly all of them are just appearing. It's like the level. It's way beyond anything we saw before because of
Hmm.
the intense level of social media at this time. So yeah, it's really insane. But I think with the declining living standards of the American public, the decay going on that we're seeing, the inflation. Earlier in the year, there was a lack of baby formula, food prices going up, all these things um, going on, destruction of the living standards of the American working class. Um, I think there is certainly, it's harder for them to justify this to the American people
Yeah,
because it's so blatant. There's all this money, unlimited money, basically, to send more and more weapons to this government in Ukraine,
hmm,
but for basic things, like student debt forgiveness, oh, there's no money for that. There's no money for any of these things that Biden said he was going to do when he came into office, but there's
yeah.
unlimited money for the military industrial complex. And I think that'd be a good segue, actually. So, your foreign policy, you've been very vocal about that, and you've been attacked for that because of how entrenched the military industrial complex is. Um, but what are your views when it comes to domestic policy and policies within the United States?
Well, I was uh, appalled on June 24th, 2022, when 6 members of the U.S. Supreme Court issued a decision, an opinion that overturned Roe versus Wade after 50 years. Uh, so I'm 66, and in my opinion, the Roe versus Wade decision of 1973 was the best Supreme Court decision in my lifetime. These 6 justices just overturned it because they could. I read the 6 opinion, the however many opinions there were, and also the dissent by the 3 honest justices. And the majority opinion was we are overturning Roe versus Wade because we have the votes. And that became a major issue for me in the last few months of the campaign up until November 8th. That became one of my main focuses, in addition to foreign policy, and I talked about both. I made one TV ad about sanctions and how we're sanctioning ourselves and they're all backfiring, and we're going to be in a Great Depression soon. And the other one was a 60-second ad about the abortion issue. And a few days after that decision, I came out with a position that the 6 justices who overturned Roe versus Wade should be impeached. They're acting like politicians, not judges. when a politician, a president or someone in a high position, um, does something outrageous and really bad for America, they can be impeached. Well, the same is true of judges. So I made a postcard that said, it had pictures of the six, kind of a cartoon pictures of them looking very stern. And it said, impeach the six. And on the back, I wrote, they're not justices. They are partisan Republican political hacks. They act like hacks. They should be impeached, like a politician who has done something really bad. And I still have that position. Those six should go. We can do very well with three honest justices for a while.
Mm.
And that's one domestic issue. The other was, I was always talking about inflation. The Republican Party and my opponent kept saying, Biden's price hike. They're trying to blame all of our economic problems on the Democrats.
Right, rather than the system and what's actually going on, like with the unlimited spending in Ukraine, rather than or the just the nature of capitalism.
Yeah, so I said, well, anyone who thinks it's that simple, that it's all the fault of Biden or the Democratic Party is lying. I'm not going to say it's all the fault of the Republicans. I said on the campaign trail, I'd say it was 60% of the fault of my opponent, Andy Barr. He was one of the ones who designed many of these sanctions against Russia, all of which failed, all of which backfired. 60% the Republicans' fault, and 40% the Democrats and President Biden's fault for going along with these ignorant sanctions. So, instead of saying it's all one side's fault, I was saying, 60-40.
Yeah, and that's what they always try and do. If it's a Republican in, the Democrats will try and blame everything on the Republican to avoid any blame on the system. When
Yeah,
there's a Democrat in, the Republicans will do the exact same thing, blame the Democrat, everything on them to avoid any blame on the
yeah.
system.
It's just so childish. That's not how the world is. It's never all one person's fault. We have a
Right.
system, as you've mentioned, a capitalist system, and we've got lobbyists, we've got defense industries constantly lobbying for more weapons production, and in effect they're lobbying for war all the time. They never sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And they control both parties. And unfortunately,
Yeah,
within the left, there's some people that think, oh, the Democrats are the lesser of two evils. And you have some people who think, oh, the Republicans, they'll be more friendly towards Russia, which is nonsense. If you look at Trump, he escalated the war in Ukraine. He gave weapons to Ukraine that Obama
right,
wouldn't even give. So it's like
right.
neither one of the two are going to lead to anything good. And that's why I think it's smart what you did, and I think more progressives should actually do this if people are going to run within one of the two parties. And I think when you were on with Jimmy Dore, he kind of joked like you're the only Democrat running for office he'd have on, because I think what you're doing is actually, or I shouldn't say Democrat, but someone running as a Democrat that he'd have on. And I think if someone is going to run, there is no reason why they should just run as one or the other, use either one, because both are completely corrupt. And if you can, it's not like one is better than the other.
Well, yeah, okay. So, right. Um, but uh, they have to be ready to sue crooks in their own party. That's what I've been doing since 2015. Um, so every time they would rig a primary, and they got, recently, starting in 2019, I ran for governor. There were three other Democrats, one of whom was the current governor who won in 2019, Andy Bashir. And so on the campaign trail in 2019, I would say at every opportunity, um, this primary is simple. We have two honest, strong Democrats, a fellow named Rocky Adkins from eastern Kentucky, the mountains, Appalachian Mountains of Kentucky, and me. And we have two crooks, Andy Bashir and this other guy. You don't want to vote for a crook, so if you don't like me, vote for Rocky Adkins. At least he'll be honest. He'll do the best job he can. He's an experienced legislator, and to elect a crook is a big mistake. And of course, they like me even less after the establishment. They don't like being called crooks to their faces, but I did it, and I accompanied that with another lawsuit. And then I ran into the problem of corrupt judges.
Yeah.
When you file a lawsuit, the judge is supposed to, and inevitably you're going to get hit with a motion to dismiss or several motions to dismiss, right?
Yeah.
I've never been hit with a motion to dismiss that had any legal merit whatsoever. They just, oh, Mr. Young is a bad person. He's had all these previous cases thrown out one after another. So, Your Honor, you should throw it out too, this new one.
Rather than actually going on any of the specifics of what it's about.
Yeah, there are civil rules which are very clear about when a case may be dismissed before discovery or before trial. And it's very rare that it's proper to dismiss a case before discovery. It has to be like borderline insane, like, Martians made me do that. Through brain waves or something. Then you can throw it out. But I had well-pleaded cases, all of them, against an ongoing conspiracy to rig one primary after another. And they'd inevitably be thrown out. I'd never get anywhere. I'd always appeal. The Kentucky Court of Appeals would uphold the corrupt judge and his or her decision in the trial court. And then the Kentucky Supreme Court would uphold the Court of Appeals. So that's another cesspool of corruption. The state Supreme Court, and then I would file petitions for certiorari to the U.S. Supreme Court, but we know that 6 of them are biased. So the Supreme Court of the United States never reviewed any of my appeals. So I ran into a brick wall of corrupt judges. And that's kind of tough, Not only did they throw out my complaints, my lawsuits before discovery, they would fine me simply for filing it.
Wow. Yeah.
They would sanction me for tens of thousands of dollars. And so, you have to be ready to fight somehow. This has been 10 years of fighting these crooks, 9 or 10.
Yeah. And you still intend on doing it, right? Because you're running for the 2023 race for governor of Kentucky. Is that correct?
That's right. The same Andy Bashir. I don't know of any other Democrat that's going to jump into this primary. So it's going to be one-on-one again.
Yeah, the old rival.
And so he was just at uh, a ceremony sponsored by the Central Kentucky Jewish Federation in downtown Lexington, and in the park there near the center of the city. Um, and I went to it. Let's see, today is what? Um, Today is Tuesday. Yeah, I went to it 2 days ago, Sunday, for a few minutes. And I got there. I had my sign, Geoff Young for Governor 2023.
Hmm.
And I knew some of the people in the crowd. There were a whole lot of reporters there. And after a minute of, showing my sign, and, I caught his eye and immediately started yelling, Andy Bashir is a crook. Lock him up. Lock him up, to his face.
And he didn't like that.
He quickly,
I think I saw an interview with him complaining about that actually.
what, today, yesterday,
Or
recently,
maybe
or months ago? It was the
maybe
same,
this is an old interview because you
yeah,
must
yeah,
have confronted him before, right?
2019, I did.
That must have been what I saw. He complained about you confronting him.
Yeah, right. So it's 2022 now, the end of 2022, and I did it again. And so, I got to yell that for about 4 or 5 minutes and then left.
I'm curious, like he from what you've described, it definitely does sound like that's accurate. Do you know like what interests, like corporations or business interests, like he's particularly connected with?
Maybe the legal community, lawyers, I don't know.
Hmm. Okay.
I haven't really studied. All I know is that he's got a big war chest, and I have nothing.
Because he's
But
basically like the standard neocon and neoliberal Democrat, right?
neoliberal,
Establishment. Awesome.
neoliberal, actually.
Yeah.
I don't use that word very often, but I think it applies pretty well to him.
Yeah. Well, I just say neoliberal, neocon in the sense of like neoliberal for austerity domestically and foreign policy. You just like sign off on the war machine and everything internationally.
Yeah, I usually call them all neocons in Washington, but occasionally you find a real neoliberal.
Mm. Yeah. The way I think of it is I think of it sort of like honestly, I feel like all the neocons are neoliberals. I haven't seen any that aren't because it's like
Okay.
I feel like the neoliberals kind of like what they do domestically, and then foreign policy is kind of like the neocon thing, and then they push like when I think of neoliberalism, I think of like the deregulation, um, privatize as much as possible, that sort of thing with the
Well,
economy.
yeah, I see almost no difference between a neocon and a neoliberal. But anyway,
Right.
uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Just two labels for yeah.
neocons are focused intensely on foreign policy. That's almost all they care about. The other stuff is just, a sideshow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Care about maintaining the U.S. empire, or if they possibly can, expanding it. But,
Hmm.
we live in a multipolar world now. It's no longer possible for the United States to dominate the world, and very soon that reality is going to come crashing in. And I don't know what will happen here when they realize they're no longer king of the hill.
Yeah, with this situation in Ukraine, we really saw that because as much as the West wanted to say that Russia is isolated, no, much of the world, in fact, probably most of the world population-wise, does not support what the West is trying to do because, especially the third world, realizes that these sanctions and all these things are also targeted towards them because they have to trade a lot with Russia, and it's causing a huge amount of destruction to the economies of a lot of countries of the third world around the world. So
Right.
it's sort of a lot of people are saying that actually the situation in Ukraine is kind of like a declaration of the end of the American NATO, Western Europe, and American hegemony around the world. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I think it indicates a real split The Russian people are never going to forget. It became very clear in 2022 that there's a just kind of an instinctual or habitual hatred of Russia and all things Russian. And it really came out, and the Russian people, maybe for the first time in many decades, actually saw that hatred directed against them. It's irrational, and they're never going to forgive us. And so I think there's a divorce, and it's going to be final. And any country in Europe that doesn't want to sink into depression and have no energy, no industry because they can't afford natural gas, is going to have to break out of NATO, quit NATO, or do something to repair their relations with Russia. But I see a second Cold War with maybe 15% of the world's population, US, Canada, Western Europe, Japan, on one side, and all the other countries in the world against us. And that's not going to be like the first Cold War, which was, somewhat equal. This is very unequal, and we're not going to come out of that winning. There's no way we can fight the entire world economically or militarily. They're building new pipelines to transport Russian energy to China and India, and Iran. Well, the north-south as well as east-west. And they're developing new financial mechanisms. So these countries, all countries except the Western Bloc, will be able to trade in their own currencies. There'll be a new reserve currency consisting of a number of commodities and gold. The whole alternative financial system and trading system is developing right now to replace the dollar and the SWIFT currency mechanism. It's happening, and pretty soon we're going to be a backwater.
Right. Yeah. And it's very refreshing to hear someone who got as far as you did within electoral politics talking this way, because there's very few people that have won a primary and are actually saying these things. The progressives and stuff, the AOC and Bernie and these people, we don't even see them talking this way. They don't talk about any of this stuff. They tend to just go along with whatever the the establishment Democrats do, and it's been that way for a long time. What I'm saying is, kind of goes without saying to most people watching this, but no, it's very refreshing to see you bring these positions forward. And so again, you are running in 2023 for governor of Kentucky. How can people support you?
Well, I'm going to redo my website, change it from Congress to governor. And I'll be talking a lot about the mismanagement of the COVID situation from 2020 until now. That's almost 3 years. I think Governor Beshear has really mismanaged it. He believed everything that Dr. Fauci and all these other national health entities were saying. And the result was that the U.S. Performed quite poorly compared to almost every other country in the world. So I'm going to be hitting him on mismanaging COVID. He put in some extreme restrictions, and the Republican-controlled legislature finally got it together and put an ending date on some of them, and Beshear vetoed that, The Republicans overrode his veto, and then Bashir went and sued the leaders of the legislature because they voted to override his veto. Well, that is not. He lost that, of course. Legislators are immune to being sued for the way they vote, but Bashir is a lousy lawyer, and he doesn't understand the separation of powers, the three branches of government. Or if he understands it, he thinks he can override it. So, he was called a dictator by many people in Kentucky. Anyway, yeah, I'll be running a campaign against him, attacking him on COVID policies and the fact that he's been rigging elections since 2015. My website is Young for Kentucky, YOUNG, the number 4, KY.com. I'm still talking about the U.S. House and international stuff, but I'm going to redo it.
Yeah, and everyone should go to that website as well as follow Geoff Young on Twitter. His Twitter handle will be is on the screen. Geoff Young for KY, the number 4. Yeah, everyone should follow his stuff and support him, share his stuff out, because yeah, you're not going to see many people running for office giving this strong of a message. So yeah, I want to wish you the best of luck in your run. Yeah, absolutely,
Thanks.
and I hope to have you back on at some point to discuss this stuff. Because yeah, this message needs to get out. We need to start challenging the establishment of both parties, and what you're doing is exactly that. So I want to thank you for doing all the great work you're doing.
Okay. Well, thanks. It's been a pleasure, and hope to talk with you again.
Great to have you on.